أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Very well. So we are, today's the third lesson on the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir. Last time we actually just got into the first mash'ar. And I think we read maybe the first paragraph or the first page. I don't remember now. Yeah, I think we only read the first paragraph, but we will now look at this more closely. A few words though. I've said this before and I can't say it often enough. I mean, this is a very important book. It's a very significant book. And Mullā Ṣadrā looks in great detail at this whole question of asalatul wujud, or the fundamental reality of existence, of being in the external world. And he presents a number of proofs for this in this book. And this is the best exposition of those proofs that he ever wrote. It's even better than and more organized and more systematic than what he presented in the Kitāb al-Asfar. And if you are familiar with the Manzuma, as it's called in Persian, of Sabzawadi, I have a copy over here. Yeah. So there's the Sharh al-Manzuma, or Sharh al-Manzuma, if you pronounce it correctly, as it's known by Mullā Hadi Sabzawadi. And this is an old sort of lithograph edition. You can see very hard to use for modern people. There was a critical edition prepared by Mahdī Muhakkik and Toshiko Izutsu at Tehran University Press. Anyhow, Mullā Hadi Sabzawadi also presents a lot of proofs. He's a 19th century, he's much later representative of the School of Transcendent Wisdom, or al-Hikmat al-Muta'aliya, and he presents a number of proofs as well for asalatul wujud. Well, where did he get them? He got them from the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir. So that's important. I think it's unfortunate that this book is kind of neglected. Nevertheless, it remains a great book. I mean, a great book is a great book because it's able to engender a community of readers, right? I mean, a great book gives rise to an audience over generations. And it is thus that it becomes great. A book like the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir is a great book because it has something to say to people, provided they remain receptive to hearing the author's voice, to responding to the author's message. And so studying a book like the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir is, or reading, actually, I would say reading in the really correct sense, reading then becomes a profoundly transformative act, a profoundly, radically transformative act, I would say. And this is true of the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir. In this regard, in terms of engendering a community of readers and an audience, I think we have to make mention of the great scholar of falsafa and irfan and editor of many very important texts, Ustad Sayyid Jalaluddin Ashtiyani. And he has a very beautiful book, which I would say, or I would characterize as being a reading of the Mashā'ir. And that is his book in Persian, a lot of quotes in Arabic though, but the main language of presentation in the book is Arabic, is called Hasti az Nazare Falsafe o Irfan. In other words, existence from the point of view of philosophy and irfan. And if Persian is a language which you are comfortable with, which you have studied, which you even have only a reading knowledge of, this is a really excellent book to read alongside the Mashā'ir. So let's just jump right in then and look at this paragraph 5 more closely. So Mullā Ṣadrā, in addition to the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir, he's written other standalone shorter works. By shorter, I mean shorter than the very large, the voluminous 9-part, 9-volume book known as the Book of the Four Journeys, or the Four Noetic Journeys, Kitāb al-Asfar al-Aqliyat al-Arba'a. And so in addition to the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir, there's another book called Ash-Shawāhid al-Rububiyyah, which also is in a very nice edition by Sayyid Jalaluddin Ashtiani. In fact, there's a picture of Ashtiani on this one, on the cover of this edition of Ash-Shawāhid al-Rububiyyah. I think there are certain printings, it's the same book, but that don't have his picture, but I have one that has his photo on it. I mean, of course, now with Google, you can probably do an image search and you'll find, but still. And there's another book he wrote called Al-Mabda' wal-Ma'ad. So these three books, Kitāb al-Mabda' wal-Ma'ad would be the origin and the return. Shawāhid al-Rububiyyah, I suppose we could translate as the stations of witnessing. So these are three smaller standalone works which present Mullā Ṣadra's school, or Mullā Ṣadra's views of al-Hikmat al-Muta'ali, and the different treatises have different emphases. Like in al-Mashā'ir, there's an emphasis on Asalat al-Wujud. In al-Mabda' wal-Ma'ad, there's more of an emphasis, I think. Well, I mean, there was another one I forgot to mention. There's al-Hikmat al-Arshiyah, the wisdom of the throne. Now that one, yeah, I'm glad I remembered that. I nearly forgot to mention. Al-Hikmat al-Arshiyah, or the wisdom of the throne, is another treatise, which is really a very short one. Like the Mashā'ir, Mashā'ir is very short. The wisdom of the throne has been translated into English in its entirety by James Morris, but it was published a long time ago. I think in 1981, if I'm not mistaken, by Princeton University Press. It's out of print. It was never republished. You really wonder why these things are not republished. And there, the emphasis is very much is more so on his doctrine and his teachings regarding ilmun nafs, or psychology, the soul. Anyway, not to spend too much time on that. So these different treatises have different emphases. So let's just go straight into the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir, the way stations of realization. Now, the heading here is Al-Fatiha, opening discourse. في تحقيق مفهوم الوجود وأحكامه وإثبات حقيقته وأحواله وفيه مشاعر. So this title, في تحقيق مفهوم الوجود وأحكامه وإثبات حقيقته وأحواله, أي في تحصيل أصل مفهوم الوجود وأحكامه تصورا وإثبات حقيقته, أي التصديق بأن له حقيقة وأحوالا في نفس الأمر بمقتضى البرهان. So even in the title, he's saying that this title, or this opening discourse, is devoted to the investigating, or the investigation of the notion of being. But when we say notion, we mean mafhum, but the actual basis for the notion of being, and what its characteristics are as a concept, tasawwuran. And then at the same time establishing its primacy, its reality, that is to say, the tasdeeq, in the sense of logic, tasawwur and tasdeeq, in the affirmative judgment that it indeed is not merely a mental notion or a mere tasawwur or concept in the mind, but possesses a reality in concreto, and that can be established by burhan, by demonstration, logical demonstration. Question?
No.
Okay. So the first way station, al-Mash'ar al-awwal, fi bayani annahu ghaniyun an al-ta'rif. The first way station is devoted to establishing that it, namely wujud, existence, being, is not in need of definition. And that, of course, is definition in the sense that we learn in Islamic logic based on Aristotle. That if you want to define something, the best way to define it is how to mention its genus and its specific difference. And it will be shown and it will be argued that wujud is the most general of concepts. Indeed, it is the basis of concept formation. And therefore, since it is the most general of things, it does not have a genus and it does not have a specific difference. So he starts out by saying, in niyatul wujudi ajla al-ashya'i huduran wa kashfan. Now, in both of the published, in both easily available published forms of this book, so that's the Hussein Nasr Ibrahim Kalin edition, as well as the Parviz Murawij edition, they have verbatim reproduced the Qurban, the edition which Qurban established. And there, I don't know why it says an-niyatul wujud. An-niyya, how do I say, why does it say that? Or why do I say that it says that? It's because in the Arabic text, the hamzatul qata' is put above the alif. Now, I don't like that. I don't think that that is correct. I think it should be in niyatul wujud. Oh, so I stand correct. So Parvez Murawij, thank you. Parvez Murawij, yeah. So there's the Parvez Murawij edition as the Metaphysics of Mullā Ṣadrā. It's actually got the Hamzatul Qata on the bottom. Okay, so that's good. All right. So he translates in niyya, Parvez Murawij, as realization, and then in square brackets he says literally inner reality. And the Nasr Kalin text has the reality of wujud. I don't agree with this. I have introduced the term the veritability of being is the clearest of things in its immediacy. أجل الأشياء حضورا وكشفا, and unhiddenness. Kashf has the sense of unveiling, being unhidden, being revealed. Hudur means present. If you know, in modern Arabic, if you study in a modern Arabic elementary, middle, or high school, junior high school, and they take attendance, you know, you can say hadr. Most people will say mawjud, but you know, also in some dialects, if someone is, you know, present or they're on their way, they'll say hadr. So hadir, hudur, it has the sense of being there. In other words, wujud has an immediacy. And it has a veritability. So why did I choose veritability? If you actually look into the term in niyya, you can derive abstract nouns in Arabic by adding this iya ending. And that is what has been done here. A term has been invented, taking alif and noon, and I'm saying it's based off of inna, not anna, and an abstract noun has been made. So the term in niyya is an abstract noun in Arabic derived from the Arabic emphatic particle inna. The letter alif juxtaposed with the following noon. If you just write alif and noon, in Arabic, that could be read logically in 4 ways: as inna, as anna, as in, and an. In and un don't mean any, have no relevance here. So some people have read this text with the word an-niyya, but I prefer the reading in niyya, and I believe that that is justified by the fact that in niyya is favored when at the beginning of a sentence. That inna is favored when at the beginning of a sentence. The Arabic jumla ismiya can have an inna there. It doesn't necessarily always have to be for emphasis. You just can introduce a nominal sentence. And when you're just relating something, you say that it's mahkiya, then it's inna mahkiya. Now, if you go the other way and say it's anniya deriving from anna, that's really only justified if we take it in the sense of haqqan, which is the weaker choice. If you want to go into the details of this, you can refer to the relevant works. I would recommend Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, who died in the year 911 of the Hijrah, his book Ham'ul Hawami' fi Sharhi Jam'il Jawami'. I have a 4-volume edition. I referred to volume 1, page 431. Now, why then, if we agree then that it's in niyya, then what about veritability? Why veritability? Well, veritability is a very nice word, and I looked into this word by referring to the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. So if you refer to the Oxford English Dictionary, volume 19, page 52, column 1, under sense 2, you will find that it reads genuine, real, true. So genuine, real, true, as an explanation or description of the term veritability, best renders the term in niyya, because it is the sheer verity and bare factuality of being, existence, wujud, which is meant here. Henry Corbin has his French translation of this, his rendering as la réalité positive de l'être, the positive reality of existence. I think that that's weaker in comparison to veritability, so I've chosen veritability. I did touch on some of this previously, so let's just go on from there. So I'm going to have it as in niyatul wujud. So Mullā Ṣadrā is making a statement here about wujud, and he's saying that the veritability of being is the clearest of things in its immediacy and unhiddenness. The next phrase, وَمَاهِيَّتُهُ أَخْفَاهَا تَصَوُّرًا وَاكْتِنَاهًا. Now, people could potentially get confused here because we have the term mahiyya. And to continue this phrase, you have to add some kind of a connecting or transitioning word in English, excuse me. And so I have chosen the word whereas, which if we did a published translation, we would put in square brackets to be really accurate in our work. So I would say whereas it's true reality. I'm translating mahiyya here as true reality. You have to be flexible in translation. If you just say that mahiyya is quiddity and that's what it's always going to be, you're going to get into problems. Because here it doesn't mean quiddity as we usually use it. It obviously refers to the different kind of quiddity. There are basically two kinds of quiddity, 2 kinds of mahiyya, right? Al-mahiyya bil-ma'na al-'am and bil-ma'na al-akhas. And one of them is said fi jawabi ma huwa, quiddity in answer to the question of what a thing is, where you give a definition. And then there's there's quiddity in the sense of ma huwa, its actual essence, or its actual true reality, as I've rendered it here. So when referring to wujud, pure being, which is none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is understood that Allah doesn't have a quiddity. And if we say he has a quiddity, he has it in the other sense, and the quiddity is identical with his being. So when he's saying mahiyatuhu here, he really means the true nature, the true reality of being, what he elsewhere refers to as haqiqatul wujud. So its haqiqa is very hidden. Its true reality is the most hidden of things conceptually and in terms of getting to its very core. Tasawwuran waqtinahan. The kunh of a thing is its very core. So it's just like what Mullā Hadi Sabzawari says in the metaphysical poem known as Ghurur al-Fara'id or Sharh al-Manzuma, but the actual matan, he says, Mafhumuhu min a'raf al-ashya'i. The notion of being is the most well-known things. And here, of course, Mullā Sadr is saying, Ajla al-ashya'i huduran wa kashfan. Mafhumuhu min a'raf al-ashya'i wa kunhuhu, but its inner core, its inner reality, its true reality, fi ghayat al-khafa'i, is in the extremity or lies in the extremity of hiddenness. وَمَاهِيَّتُهُ أَخْفَاهَا تَصَوُّرًا وَاقْتِنَاءً. And now he comes to the mafhum and its notion. وَمَفْهُومُهُ أَغْنَى الْأَشْيَاءِ عَنِ التَّعْرِيفِ ظُهُورًا وَوُضُوحًا. While its notion, and again, while I'm going to have to introduce here probably in square brackets, but while its notion is the least of things in need of definition due to its apparentness and obviousness, in addition to its being the most general of things due to its comprehensiveness. وَأَعَمُّهَا شُمُولًا. Now, wallahi, look at the beauty of this whole sentence. How loaded with meaning it is. Inniyatul wujudi ajlal ashya'i huduran wa kashfa wa mahiyatuhu akhfaha tasawwuran wa iktinaha wa mafhumuhu أغنى الأشياء عن التعريف ظهورا ووضوحا وأعمها شمولا. If you have an appreciation for the Arabic language, you can't help but just be utterly mesmerized, fascinated, and astonished by not only the technical brilliance of the construction here, the literary beauty, but also the profundity of meaning in these barely 3 lines in the Qurban edition of Arabic text. He continues, وَهُوِيَّتُهُ أَخَصُّ الْخَوَاصِّ تَعَيُّنًا وَتَشَخُّصًا. Okay, however, I'm putting that in square brackets also. It's thatness. So here I've had to introduce the term for huwiyya. Huwa is the masculine singular third person pronoun in Arabic, typically rendered into English by he or it. Now in Arabic, there is no neuter grammatical gender. Everything has grammatical gender. But in English, you wouldn't refer to a book as a he. You refer to it as an it. But huwa also is that which is, it's the third person. What's the third person called in Arabic? In English it says first person, second person, third person. But in Arabic, the first person is the one who's doing the talking, al-mutakallim. The second person is the person being talked to, the mukhatab. The third person is al-ghaib. It's not there. Or, it's there, but it's I could refer to, huwa something, right? But it's called al-ghaib. And so I'm using this term. I had to come up with something for huwiyya. If we were talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he-ness would probably work. Unless you're on that sort of feminist bandwagon, and God is a woman and all this sort of business, which we have nothing to do with. So he-ness would work. I've actually seen that in some translations of Sufi texts. So I've said, however, it's thatness. In other words, the thatness. You could maybe even use suchness. The problem is if you use suchness, it sounds already like a Zen Buddhist text, because they use that term for the Sanskrit tathata. Anyway, we don't want to get into all these things. So anyway, you can agree with me or not, but I'm using for huwiyya thatness. However, it's thatness. The thatness, in other words, of being or existence, is the most specific of specificities in entification and individuation. Ta'ayyunan wa tashakhusan, for it is by none other than that. إذ به يتشخص كل متشخص ويتحصل كل متحصل ويتعين كل متعين ومتخصص وهو متشخص بذاته ومتعين بنفسه كما ستعلم. However, its thatness is the most specific of specificities, identification and individuation, for it is by none other than it that every individuated thing is individuated, and every actualized thing is actualized, and every entified and particularized thing is entified. And it is individuating in itself and entifying in itself, as you shall come to know. So this is really beautiful. And if you actually look at other statements of Mullā Ṣadrā in his other books, which I mentioned at the beginning, like Shawāhid al-Rububiyyah, you'll find he has similar, very eloquent sort of opening statements of the undefinability of being. So, for example, if you go to, just by way of, I'll give one example, and then it's the same is true for al-Mabda wal-Ma'ad, but I'm going to go to Shawāhid al-Rububiyyah in the well-known Jalaluddin Ashtiani edition in al-Mashhad al-Awwal, that's page 134. He's talking about the tahaqquq of wujud. It's called al-Ishraq al-Awwal fi tahaqquqihi, the first illumination concerning its realization, or the realization of being. He says al-wujudu, and again, this is really beautiful. It's 3 lines. Just look at the beauty here. Al-wujudu ahaqqu al-ashya'i bit-tahaqquq لأن غيره به يكون متحققا وكائنا في الأعيان وفي الأذهان فهو الذي به ينال كل ذي حق حقيقته فكيف يكون أمرا اعتباريا كما يقوله المحجوبون عن شهوده. This is an important issue. We'll come to this. So that means existence is the most worthy of all things of being realized. For it is through it that all that is other than it is realized and comes to exist in the external world, as well as in the mind. فِي الْأَعْيَانِ وَفِي الْأَذْهَانِ. Thus it is that by which all that has any ontological claim, to exist attains to its reality. يَنَالُ كُلُّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقِيقَتُهُ. How then can it be merely mentally posited, as is maintained by those who are veiled from witnessing it? Now, this is a very key point. By those who are veiled from witnessing it. كما يقوله al-mahjubuna an shuhudihi. So this whole notion of veiling and unveiling and shuhud is part and parcel of the teaching of Mullā Ṣadrā. So whilst at the very beginning in the title of this opening discourse, this al-Fatiha as he calls it, obviously evoking the opening surah of the Quran, he's making clear that he wants to investigate the notion of being, its implications, and he also wants to establish its primary reality by proof, by burhan. You know, that it's not merely mentally posited, it's not just a tasawwur. It has a haqiqah, it has a misdaq, it has a reality, it has a referent in the external world, in concreto, and it is fundamentally real. But to really know that, haqiqatul wujud, mafhumul wujud, everyone has a notion of it. Everyone has a fundamental sort of ontological minimum which they all understand. They all know the meaning of is. They all know the meaning of what it means for something to exist. Even if they don't have a name for a thing, and it could be a physical object, it could be an experience. They're at a loss for words, or they just don't know the name of a thing. So imagine if someone who has never seen a giraffe, and they've never heard of one. It'd be very hard nowadays to find such a person who's never heard of a giraffe, never seen it on the internet anywhere, never seen it on a documentary. But you do have that situation with children, don't you? So let's say we did that. Let's say we took a child to the zoo or took them on safari in Africa, and they were to encounter a giraffe for the very first time, something completely out of their experience. They wouldn't know what to call it. What would they do? The child would ask an adult, what is it? And be told it's a giraffe or whatever in their language, and then they have a name for it. But that child would not question the existence of this bizarre creature that has presented itself to its senses. Similarly, if you undergo some profound experience that makes a very deep impression on you emotionally or psychologically or what have you, you might say you're at a loss for words. But you wouldn't doubt that you had that experience, that you underwent that state of affairs. So that is the notion of being that everyone has. But the reality of being is none other than the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, what does it mean to say that you know God? It's a very big thing. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, Man arafa nafsuhu faqad arafa rabbahu. Allama Tabatabai was asked, you know, what is the meaning of Shi'ism? He said, it is to know God. The Quran says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We've only created jinns and men that they may come to, that they may worship me. Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam was asked, what does this mean? It means to know me. Well, knowing Allah is not an easy thing. And Mullā Ṣadrā makes it very clear in this book, in fact. He makes it clear in all his writings. I mean, if you read his very interesting, from a biographical viewpoint, introduction to the Kitāb al-Asfar, you know, he says many things there, but for our purposes here, he makes it very clear that he came to this idea of asaratul wujud through a very profound realization that he was blessed with by Allah. And he makes the same, he makes an admission of the same kind in this very book, the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir, on page 35 of the Qurban edition. Many people won't have that edition, but the paragraphs are all numbered the same. It's paragraph 85. So if you have a copy with you, you might want to look at paragraph 85. It's about 12 lines of text in this edition. So about halfway down that paragraph, he says, less than halfway down. So he first talks about how people, you know, had upheld the idea of asalatul mahiyya, and that he was one of those as well, that quiddity is fundamentally real in the external world, but until Allah guided me. So he said, hatta hadani rabbi, until I was guided by my Lord, وأراني برهانه, and he showed me his proof. فانكشف لي غاية الانكشاف, and it became unveiled to me, or utterly unveiled or utterly revealed to me. غاية الانكشاف أن الأمر فيها على عكس ما تصوروه وقرروه. That the matter was the opposite of what they had thought it was and what they had concluded it was. فالحمد لله الذي, so praise is due to Allah, who أخرجني عن ظلمات الوهم بنور الفهم, who took me out of the darknesses, plural, the gloom of illusion, into the light of understanding. وَأَزَاحَ عَنْ قَلْبِي صُحُبَ تِلْكَ الشُّكُوكِ, and who dispersed from my heart the clouds of those doubts, بِطُلُوعِ شَمْسِ الْحَقِيقَةِ, through the rising of the sun of reality, S-U-N. وَثَبَّتَنِي عَلَى الْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ, and he established me in the truly, established word. في الحياة الدنيا والآخرة, in this world and the next. فالوجودات حقائق متأصلة والماهيات هي الأعيان الثابتة التي ما شمت رائحة الوجود أصلا. So he says that the existing things are realities, but they have, they are muta'assila, they are rooted in that principle of wujud. والماهيات, now here he says something very interesting, and the quiddities are none other than the fixed entities, which have, in essence, not even smelled the fragrance of being. That phrase is from Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi. There's no footnote or anything to that effect here, but that is a phrase from Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi. And Mullā Ṣadrā is very much indebted to Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi and has quoted a lot from him in his writings, but has also been deeply, deeply influenced by this very important man. And that brings us to another dimension of the teaching of Mullā Ṣadrā. So if really it is a kind of unveiling, this deep kind of experience, then what does it have to do with philosophy? Well, then that really raises the question of what philosophy means. What is philosophy supposed to be? There are different definitions of philosophy. I mean, I have all of these books here, but it's a little bit easier just to refer to Ashtiani's book, Hasti as Nazr Falsafa Arfan, because it sort of gathers it all together in one place. But there are different definitions of philosophy. So here's one. This is from Mullā Hadi Sabzawari. الحكمة صيرورة الإنسان عالما عقليا مضاهيا للعالم العيني. Now this is Mullā Hadi Sabzawari. Notice that he doesn't say الفلسفة صيرورة الإنسان عالما عقليا مضاهيا للعالم العيني. He says الحكمة. So he says wisdom. And many people, Mullā Ṣadrā among them, use the term falsafa and hikmah interchangeably. I don't know who was the first to do this. I couldn't say. I'm not too interested in this class in historical questions, but I think a noteworthy figure in this regard has to be Ibn Rushd. Because Ibn Rushd was concerned with this whole question, and this is an issue in the history of Islamic philosophy, of Islamic thought. We may call it the theological philosophical problem. what is the relationship between theology and philosophy? Or to put it in other terms, how do we address the divide? In fact, even is there even a divide between reason and revelation? Now, I would argue that there isn't one. And Ibn Rushd tried to do this too, in a very small and very readable and very well-written treatise called فصل المقال فيما بين الحكمة والشريعة من الاتصال. So فصل المقال is, you could translate as that as the decisive word. You could put it in more American terms, say the last word. فصل المقال. The last word, or the decisive word, the decisive discourse concerning the relationship between wisdom and the sacred law. So anyhow, he uses the term hikmah also. So I think that there was, long before Mullā Ṣadrā, this sense, because Ibn Rushd is he died in, I think, 520, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So he's long before, he died in the 6th century, whatever the date is. Mullā Ṣadrā is much later. So I think there's plenty of people before Mullā Ṣadrā. I think that the realization was there, or there was the idea in the minds of people who are interested in falsafa, that falsafa has to be identified with wisdom, and it is synonymous with wisdom, and wisdom is characterized in the Quran, very famous ayah, that whoever has been granted wisdom has been granted abundant good. So Mullā Hadi Sabzawari is saying that wisdom is the becoming of the human being a world parallel to the external world. In other words, inasmuch as philosophy, which is synonymous with wisdom, is the investigation of the ultimate causes of all things, and the ordering thereof of the cosmos, then that has a reflection in the microcosm, which is none other than the human being. And so, because it's the investigation of these ultimate causes of things, all causes, modes of explanation, the ultimate explanation, the ultimate nature of things, causes in the sense of Aristotle. So it also serves to sort of organize everything. And so falsafa, or hikmah, philosophy or wisdom, is a kind of architectonic science also, because it seeks a structure. It is a cosmos, the Greek word, and it is not a chaos. And so in doing so, in undertaking that journey, there is a becoming, and then the human being reflects that cosmos within himself as well. And of course, in the Islamic context, there are the very important verse from the Quran about how, when Allah says, how I will show them my signs on the horizons and in themselves, until it becomes manifestly clear to them that it, or he, or how you translate that part, is the ultimate truth. سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. سورة فُصِّلَتْ. So that's one definition which Ashtiani quotes in Hastiya's Nazar Falsafa Irfan. Now there's another one. This is taken from the commentary on the Mashā'ir. I'm not sure which commentary he's referring to, because the commentary there, he may, I don't know which one he's referring to. He says Sharjah Risalat al-Mashā'ir because he quotes it in Persian. So he says, فلسفه عبارت است از علم به احوال اعیان موجودات خارجیه به قدر الطاقة البشرية. But you could easily just retranslate that back into Arabic, assuming it was Arabic, as الفلسفة عبارة عن العلم بأحوال الأعيان الموجودة الخارجية بقدر الطاقة البشرية. Right? So philosophy is the knowledge of the states or conditions or characteristics of all external things, really, to the degree humanly possible. Now, Mullā Ṣadrā, in the opening of the Asfar proper, after all the introductory stuff about his life and the problems he had and how he was, didn't like the age in which he lived and so on. So the usual kind of things which truly original and nawabigh, men of genius, have always had this complaint. Inna al-falsafata, he gives the definition. Inna al-falsafata istikmalu nafs. إن الفلسفة استكمال النفس الإنسانية بمعرفة حقائق الموجودات على ما هي عليها والحكم بوجودها تحقيقا بالبراهين لا أخذا بالظن والتقليد بقدر الوسع الإنساني. And then he sort of repeats this one which we read from Mullā Hadi. وإن شئت قلت نظم العالم نظما عقليا على حسب طاقة البشرية ليحصل التشبه بالباري. Very similar to what last part, what Sabzawari said. So philosophy, and here's an inna here. This is just an inna mahkiya. He's not really giving for emphasis. The jumla ismiya. Philosophy is the seeking of the completion or the perfection. I'm just translating this right now by sight. Istikmalu nafs al-insaniya. So istakmala yustakmilu is to seek perfection or completion. Form 10, af'ala, istaf'ala. So philosophy is the seeking of the completion or the perfection, or exerting, oneself towards completion or perfection of the human soul. And nafs al-insani, which is a nafs al-natiqa. It's very interesting that it begins with nafs. It's the rational soul, because Mullā Ṣadrā has his own idea about the soul. He says, an-nafsu what? Jismaniyatul huduth ruhaniyatul baqa. That the soul comes into being with the body. It's corporally eventuated and has a spiritual subsistence, ruhaniyat al-baqa. At any rate, so philosophy is part of this movement of the nafs from potency to act, بمعرفة حقائق الموجودات, by coming to know the reality of existing things. As the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have supplicated to Allah, Allahumma arina haqaiq al-ashya'i kama hiya. Oh Allah, show me the reality of things as they are. Ala ma hiya alayha, as they really are. So philosophy is the seeking of the perfection or the completion of the human soul through the knowledge of the reality of things as they really are. Allahumma arina haqaiq al-ashya'i kama hiya. Oh Allah, show me the reality of things as they truly are. وَالْحُكُمْ بِوُجُودِهَا تَحْقِيقًا بِالْبَرَاهِينِ. And then a kind of judgment regarding their existence based on rational demonstration, logical argument, apodictic proof, تحقيقا بالبراهين, لا أخذا بالظن والتقليد. Not through reliance on just guesswork or supposition, neither relying on supposition nor on blind imitation. بقدر الوسع الإنساني, to the degree humanly possible. وإن شئت قلت, and if you like, I would have said the ordering of the world, نظم العالم, or the ordering of the cosmos in a noetic fashion, نظما عقليا, the noetic ordering of the cosmos. I said philosophy is an architectonic science. The ordering of the cosmos intellectually, as an intelligible, على حسب الطاقة البشرية, to the degree humanly possible, ليحصل التشبه بالباري, in order that one might attain to likeness of the fashioner or the creator. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is also reported to have said, تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, take upon yourself divine characteristics, the characteristics of God. In other words, of mercy, of forbearance, forgiveness, etc. So philosophy for Mullā Ṣadrā is a very different sort of thing than it is now. It is not some kind of a purely academic ivory tower pursuit engaged in by professionals who are part of the academic military industrial prison complex, if you want to use the locutions that are in vogue among certain circles now, or simply part of some sort of a university institution where they're just getting paid to supposedly, teach young people about philosophy and write papers to be published in journals to be cited by their friends and so on and so forth, and peer review and all of this kind of thing. So philosophy is an actual activity through which the human being is striving to bring about the latent potentialities of the rational soul to truly realize their humanity, to truly become a genuine human being. So that's not what is happening in most philosophy departments in universities today. So this is what Mullā Ṣadrā is about. And he's talking, though, about wujud. And it's very clear, he says that, that he came to this idea of asalatul wujud through a spiritual experience. Right? Well, what were people saying about wujud before him? That's an important question. What was being said about wujud prior to Mullā Ṣadrā? What did other philosophers have to say about wujud? Indeed, what was the understanding of wujud among different mutakallimun or theologians of the various Sunni schools, like the Ash'aris, the Mu'tazilis, and in fact also people who were confirmed Shi'is like Nasiruddin al-Tusi, and people who, in my view, were more than likely Shīʿī as well, like Ibn Sina. What did they have to say about wujud? This is also an important question. So again, you have to see that he is writing in a certain context, historical and intellectual context, and when he makes his claim about asalatul wujud, he's making it against the backdrop of other claims having been made about wujud. And I'll mention one of those, and we'll conclude, and we'll pick up with what has been said about wujud before Mullā Ṣadrā in the next class, and then also look at why he thinks that it can't be defined. So it should be pretty obvious, if you've been following along carefully, that Mullā Ṣadra's vision of wujud is something like a Sufi vision, or something which, now he didn't really use the word Sufi at all for what he was espousing. He didn't like this term. There was tasawwuf in Iran at the time. There was tasawwuf which was Shi'i in allegiance. There was tasawwuf which was Sunni in allegiance as well. But again, I'm not an expert on Safavid social history. But if we go by Mullā Ṣadra's own statements, especially in the introductions to various books, especially the Asfar, also, but other books as well, and also a book which he wrote called Kasr Asnam al-Jahiliya. Kasr Asnam al-Jahiliya, the breaking of the idols of the days of ignorance. And then another treatise which he actually wrote in Persian, the only book that I know of that he wrote in Persian. He was also a poet in the Persian language, but as in terms of works and monographs and treatises, is a book called the Book of the Three Principles of Rizvi, in which he also attacks the ulama and the Sufis of his time. So if you go by that, it seems that what went by the name of Sufism at the time was quite antinomian. That is to say that you would find people who would say that they were adherents of Sufism, but they wouldn't be practicing the Sharia properly. They may be engaging in practices that many people would find problematic. Ecstatic sort of gatherings, music and dance and whatnot, or what resembles to be dance or something like this. So if that's what you mean by Sufism, if that's what is understood by Sufism, then Mullā Ṣadrā is not in agreement with that. But if you look at someone like Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, and if you look at the spiritual experience of existence, then there's something there which is very similar. Of course, it goes by a name. Post Ibn al-Arabi, it goes by a name which is Wahdatul Wujud. The oneness or the unicity or the unity of being, or the unity of existence. So is Mullā Ṣadrā saying the same thing? Not exactly. You have to look at the history of Tasawwuf, and you find people, like if you go back and you find writings. So there was a very important figure in Sufism named Junaid al-Baghdadi. He has a Rasail, which have been critically edited and published in the Gibb Memorial series. And so you can read what is there. You can read other important early Sufi book is the Risalatul Qushayriya. And so you can see that people had some sort of experience in which, through their supererogatory acts of worship, spending the deep watches of the night in devotion to Allah, praying what's known as the Tahajjud prayer, or Salatul Layl, Namaz al-Shab, doing extra dhikr, recitation of the Quran, additional optional fasts, and giving regularly alms, even a small amount, but regularly. Most of these guys were pretty poor. They didn't have thousands and thousands of dinars. So all of these additional practices, and they get to the point where they feel that all they see is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, people like Shahid Mutahhari, Murtada al-Mutahhari, this famous contemporary Iranian scholar, he has a very famous book in Persian commenting on the Manduma of Sabzawadi, and it's also translated into Arabic. And so he has, I think, 2 chapters in the first volume, short, very, very short chapters on this whole question of Wahdatul Wujud. And he makes the observation, I think he's right, that this is more a question of Wahdatul Shuhud than Wahdatul Wujud. Now, Wahdatul Shuhud also becomes an istilah later. So I don't mean it necessarily mean, so I don't want to go there. I just want to say just the linguistic meaning, saying that these people have spent so much time in worship and so much time literally drowning, so to speak, in God consciousness and taqwa, that they feel that they only see God. So is that something which is just in their, and that they're experiencing? So they see that, so that all that they witness is just Allah. It means Wahdatul Shuhud in that sense. Or is it actually the case that nothing really exists but Allah? So the guy is walking down the street and he sees everything that you see when you walk down, let's say, through a ancient marketplace of an ancient Arabian Islamic metropolis, Baghdad, right? So you see the fruit sellers and the cobblers and the people who are banging away in the metalwork, and you see a masjid here, and you see a khanqa and a beggar and a this thing and a that thing, and mules and donkeys and people on horseback and some Bedouins selling camel, and I don't know. Right? You see all this, but you don't really see it. You claim that all you see is Allah. That's wahdat al-shuhud, in that sense, that you're claiming that the totality of what you experience is nothing but Allah. But is it really the case? In other words, those individual entities, those a'yan that are there in the external world, is it true that they really don't exist? And that there's really only Allah? So I think a lot of these early Sufis are not necessarily going there. It's more a kind of wahdat al-shuhud experience. And Mahdī gives us some interesting examples from Persian poetry, from quotations from the Bustan of Sa'di. Although he doesn't give a footnote, I don't know, there's different editions. I don't know exactly where that is. But the fact remains that there is some kind of a yearning, right, which is behind this whole sort of spiritual quest, which I think is very nicely and very beautifully, I think, portrayed and in the opening lines of the Masnavi of Jalaluddin Rumi, the so-called Song of the Reed, right, where there is this longing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and where this whole Sufi quest comes. But it's not really until someone like Ibn al-Arabi where you have this real idea of wahdat al-wujud, where they say, no, it's not just you thinking that there's nothing, it's this state that you are in, and that state is in you and maybe in other people. That is the actual state of affairs in the external world. So that's what you have with someone like Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, although it's been said that he really didn't come up with the term wahdat al-wujud, that it was Sadr al-Qunawi who came up with it. That's been argued. Other people say no, he has ibarat which are very close to that. The other people who are there, it's a guy named what is his name, Jahangiri. He has a book on Muhyiddin ibn Arabi in Persian. So he claims that there are things like in the Futuhat that are very close to the phrase wahdat al-wujud. Whatever the case may be, in the more accessible and much smaller, more accessible because of its size, not because of what is in it, but this tiny book, the Fusus al-Hikam, especially in the chapter on Joseph, for example, there's this idea that the cosmos is divine shadow. And there's also a discussion of dream and reality and illusion, and he says that what we see around us is khayalun fi khayal, that even when we're awake we're in a dreaming state. So Mullā Sadr is influenced by this, but is his version of wahdat al-wujud, which is asalat al-wujud, is a kind of wahdat al-wujud? Is it the same as what Sufis who are following Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, like Sadr al-Qunawi in his school, are they espousing the same thing? And the answer is no. The wahda that they have in mind is al-wahdatu al-shakhsiyya lil-wujud, and Mullā Sadra's is al-wahdatu al-tashkikiyya lil-wujud. Because they're saying that there is no tashkik, that there are no maratib, there are no gradations of less and more being, or intensity and weakness of being, that wujud is just one thing. The haqiqatul wujud is haqiqatul wujud. And these a'yan, these other things that you see, is just khayalun fi khayal. Another image which is used later in Sufi poetry is this idea of the ocean and water, and that if anything, what we think we see around us is nothing but hubab. A hubab is a bubble. You find this imagery very much in the style of poetry used in India at the time, which I think is quite wrongly called Sabke Hindi, because of this man known as what was his name? Malik al-Shu'ara Bahar, in his book Sabak Shanasi. I think this is complete nonsense. There's no Indian style. Sabke Hindi is, even the term Sabk is not really a literary term. In India, they never used it. They used things like Ravish and Tarz. At any rate, not to go on that, but the poet Bedil or Bidil has that imagery. So they're saying that Haqiqatul Wujud is just there. But Mullā Ṣadrā is saying that Haqiqatul Wujud is mushakkaka. And that this Waqiyya Kharijiyya is wujud, but it is that maratib, that it has gradations of severity and intensity at every grade or at every rank or at every level. And so a lot of these urafa have rejected that idea of tashkik, but Mullā Ṣadrā upholds it. So that's a key difference. Otherwise, they're very similar. And many times you might think that they're saying exactly the same thing, especially when they become more poetic. So Mullā Ṣadrā has borrowed a great deal from Ibn al-Arabi, and you'll see that there's even whole phrases later on in this, actually in the second Mash'ir, where he talks about how it is that wujud encompasses all things, fi kayfiyati shumulihi lil ashya. And there he introduces other terms from Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, other Akbariyan terms, namely the breath of the All-Merciful, and Nafasul Rahmani, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So to conclude, this opening paragraph of the Kitāb al-Mashā'ir is very deep and very profound, devoted to the indefinability and self-evident, well, the self-evident character of being, that it's ghaniyun an al-ta'rif. And you know, he has borrowed a great deal, I think, from Muhyiddin al-Arabi. And we'll just stop there and pick this up next time. Thank you very much for watching. Fi aman.